I know I've shared this story before, but after, it's almost been 12 years I've been here as pastor, so there's a lot of stories I've shared a few different times. But back in 1976, I had just bought my first car. Like 2 weeks after I turned 16, my mom and dad didn't have the finances, so it was like if we want our own car, we buy our own car, pay for our own insurance, that whole gamut. So I saved up money, bought a Ford Maverick. Isn't that interesting? Now I got a grandson named Maverick. Ford Maverick. 4-speed. I mean, it was a hot car. It was souped up. I just think, when I bought it, this was my dumbness as being a pastor's kid. I'd never seen what these little clips were for before, and I bought the Maverick, and I brought it home, and my sister had to tell me it was a roach clip. I didn't know what it was. I never... for marijuana from the person I bought it from. Anyway, so I know, that's a sidetrack. It's a good thing I didn't know what they were, right? That's good. But it needed new spark plugs, so I went down to Kmart. Some of you may remember Kmart was on West Main there, on West Main and Drake. I mean, it's been torn down quite a few years ago. I went there, and in the front part was their automobile area. Went there, and I bought 8 spark plugs. And when I'm at the counter buying them, they only charged me, it was like $1.18 for 8 spark plugs. And I'm thinking, I'm getting a deal, because they were $1.18 per spark plug. And I had 8 in the package. But I'm getting a deal. I paid for it. I went home. Of course, I had to tell my dad. You know, you got a good deal like that. Aren't you going to share it with your folks? Wrong thing to do. If some of you know, my dad was a pastor too. What did he say? You go back and pay the entire bill. Come on, Dad, I just saved all this money. Why do I need to go back? You go back and pay the entire bill because you are a Christian and because you have integrity in who you are. You need to do that. I mean, how many of you haven't been undercharged at times? Probably most of us, right? At one time or another, we're undercharged. Do we actually tell the cashier, you're undercharging me? I actually owe you more money? Or do we sit back and say, man, I got a great deal? But what happens if you're overcharged? If you're overcharged, do you speak up? Yeah. You speak up and say, hey, wait a minute, you just charged me too much money. Or if they don't give you the exact change back, they give you less change than what you really are supposed to be getting. So why is it that we, when we're undercharged, think it's their fault and we don't have to say anything, but when we're overcharged, we say, no, we want what's ours back to us? When I went back as the 16-year-old, I learned a very important lesson that day. I got back and the cashier looked at me and said something like, you're doing what? You're being honest? We don't have this. You know what, young man? Just take the other 7 spark plugs, and it was our mistake. But thank you for your honesty. So the reality was I didn't end up having to pay for them anyway. But I learned a lesson about being honest. We're looking at, and if you're with us for the first time today, we've been looking at the last 8 weeks, the 10 Commandments. And Hank, there we go. What we're going to do is we're on number 8, but I want us to just look at the first 7 just briefly. And I want you to read with me what's up in white. So let's read together. And God spoke all these words. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. You shall not make for yourself an idol in the form of anything in heaven above, or on the earth beneath, or in the waters below. You shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. Remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. We talked about the first one, have no other gods before me. We've got to put first things first. God says, I took you out of your slavery. I took you out of your sin. I have a claim on your life. I have a claim. I am your parent. Put first things first. Secondly, don't make any graven images, any idols. If you believe Scripture, which I do, I believe that we are created in God's image from Genesis. We are already in the image of God. We need no other image of God to worship God. Third one, don't misuse the name of the Lord your God. We tend to say that has to do with swearing, the four-letter words, the cussing. And it does, but it has to do with more than that. The fact if you are a Christian, you have that name Christian. I'm a Van Hukelum. I'm proud to be a Van Hukelum. When I used to go to rock concerts in the 70s, my dad would always say, remember who you are and who you represent. Don't drag the family name, the Christian name, through the mud with your attitudes and actions. The Sabbath day, every day, 24/7 is holy to God, not just one day. Let's read the next 6. Honor your father and your mother, so that you may live long in the land the Lord your God has given you. You shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's anything. That's right. We'll get to that one. Okay, what we looked at is honor your father and mother. We're called to obey, be in submission, be respect, attention, all those things to our parents. You shall not murder. Life is sacred from the womb to the tomb. We have a society today that says abortion is okay. We have a society today that is pushing youth in Asia being okay. Totally against what Scripture talks about, the sacredness of life. You should not commit adultery. We talked about this last week. Save it till marriage. And the marriage relationship is a model of our relationship with God. We are the bride. Jesus Christ is the groom. We're called to be faithful in our physical relationship to the groom, Jesus Christ, and not be chasing. It goes back to the number one. I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. Don't be chasing other gods. Don't be chasing other people, but save yourself for your marriage. Today we're going to look at you shall not steal. Well, this is an interesting one, and it's been interesting with all these because the Wednesday night study group, when they come to my house, they tend to say, okay, thou shalt not steal. Isn't that pretty just point blank? Okay, we're all done. What else have we got to talk about? We had that last week with you should not commit adultery. It was interesting, though, Wednesday night for the 6 or 7 people that were sharing at my house, I asked them the question, how many of you have ever stolen? And it was interesting because, yeah, you know, when I was a kid, I took a candy bar. Or, man, when I was younger, I did this. Or, man, I actually did this in my life. The reality is, when we look at it, we have all broken every one of these commandments. But for this one, you shall not steal. What does the word mean? The Hebrew word is ganab, which actually simply means to steal away, to carry away, to take that which belongs to another without the person's consent or without their knowledge. So to steal from somebody else without their consent or without their knowledge. Well, as we look at this, we need to really look at the ideas, why is this important to God? I think one of the basic ideas is it's trust. It gets back into last week again of you shall not commit adultery. The idea with that is, do you trust God to provide for your physical, sexual needs in your life? To be within a marriage relationship. Do you trust God for that, or do you want to go off and get it yourself? Go off and get it yourself? You're saying we don't trust God. Do not steal is that same idea. Do we trust God to provide for our needs? Not necessarily wants. A lot of us have a lot of different wants that don't fit in within the needs that we have within our lives. So the question is, do we trust God? The author of James says, James 1, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of the heavenly lights, who does not change like shifting shadows. James is simply saying, everything that we receive comes from God. So the question is, when God says to you and me, don't steal, he's saying, in effect, do you trust me? Do you trust me to provide